I want to thank you for joining me again as we continue on with our series, From Other to One Another, our daily devotional series that accompanying our Sunday morning sermon series. I want to thank you for joining us for that as we explore the richness of our relationships with one another. What's the biggest thing that you have had to put up with some others? That's a tough question, because we're often asked to be put up with some pretty significant things, to just tolerate some things that don't make sense to us, that seem wrong or just not acceptable. That's different than having to deal with things that are obvious sins, but there are those times where, just somebody has some idiosyncrasies, some little quirks about them that just challenge us. Paul instructs us in Colossians chapter 3, bear with one another, forgive one another's grievances, forgive any grievances you may have against one another. Now, it's interesting that Paul, in that statement of forgiving one another, is not talking about particular sins, because he doesn't say forgive someone if they have sinned against you. He says forgive whatever grievances you may have. That term itself is not necessarily a term indicative of someone sinning against you. It's just my complaint against someone. Some complaint or grievance that I may have. Husbands, it can be my husband snores too loud. It can be wives, she doesn't do the dishes often enough, or keep my clothes done, or with children, they don't keep their room cleaned, or a number of different kind of minor things that we can do to just irritate each other. In bearing with one another, it's that kind of thing that Paul's talking about. It's sometimes we just need to put up with each other. We need to cut each other some slack. We sometimes create such high barriers and high expectations of one another that we just push each other away. Now, the term there, bear with one another, not be a bear to each other. We can do that ourselves naturally. But to bear with one another, to hang in there with each other, to be each other's cheerleader, to encourage one another along, to realize that there's differences and distinctives that we have from one another, and saying some of those things can be okay. When I moved to Chicago, I had some cultural indoctrination to do. It was an entirely different environment than I ever lived in, and I had to learn how to put up with some stuff that, quite frankly, in any other place, I would not have had the tolerance for. One of those was simply going to the grocery store and having people be angry with me for shopping and trying to check out my items. I've never had cashiers in other places treat me rudely just because I'm giving them business. Is it okay? I'm not saying it's okay, but I'm saying I cut people some slack. And at that point, I begin to look at people and say, okay, what's going on? Why are they treating me this way? You see, sometimes the reason they're treating me this way is because they've been being treated that way by other customers, and they've just reached the end of their rope, and I end up getting the brunt of their abuse. And I decided I'm going to bear with them. I'm going to hold them up. I'm going to encourage them. I'm going to be a support. And I say something to them to brighten their day, to bear with them in the midst of a difficult time.